What's going on, Nick? I haven't listened to your 5 questions yet. I'm going to play them live and respond to each one in turn. And obviously, I'm not, maybe not obviously, but I'm not a standard theist. I don't really call myself a theist. There are, in fact, many videos that I've made on my channel, more on Red Light Rocket 4 from a few years ago, where I called myself an atheist. But with words, there's always room for contextual redefinition, and I think philosophically I would be categorized as a panentheist, or I would categorize myself as such. So I'm not a theist in the sense that I don't think God or the divine entirely transcends the created universe that we see and experience all around us. I think that the divine is in the created universe, and that the created universe is in God. So panentheism, all in God, also means that God is in all. And I don't call myself a Christian either, but the Christian symbol of the incarnation, perhaps it's more than a symbol in some sense, is really a panentheistic doctrine, even though many Christians consider the Creator to be entirely transcendent to the universe. This idea that God, or the Logos, incarnated into flesh and then died. You don't get a more panentheistic doctrine than that. God became, or the transcendent became immanent through that incarnational process. And so panentheism is a sort of mystical version of Christianity. So let me see what kind of questions you got.
What evidence do you find to be the most convincing for God's existence, or for the existence of the God of your religion? Is it the miracles, or the reports of miracles, rather, or the prophecies in Scripture, or is it some personal spiritual experience you've had, or something I haven't mentioned? What is it do you find to be the most convincing evidence for God's existence?
I don't think we have to, or me personally, I don't need to believe in any miracles or Scripture necessarily. For me, the divine is something we experience. Even in our ordinary everyday experience, the fact that we can categorize it as such, as ordinary, means that we're comparing it to something extraordinary and transcendent, which forms the horizon of our ordinary day-to-day lives. So another thing would be the creative urge of evolution that we understand scientifically to be operating all around us, not just in the biosphere, but in the cosmos as a whole. There are these processes of emergence where entirely novel structures are generated from what had been simpler structures which existed before it. So you think of after the Big Bang, there's only photons, and then somehow photons become atoms, hydrogen atoms, and then hydrogen atoms become stars, which after supernova explosions create heavier elements which form planets, or other stars which form planets. And then on the surface of these planets, molecules emerge and become living cells, which emerge into multicellular organisms, and so on. And there's nothing in hydrogen atoms which would lead you to believe that living multicellular organisms would eventually emerge out of them. There's a novel creation of a higher degree of order and value also, because a multicellular organism, like you and I, has a more intense form of consciousness than a hydrogen atom. If you're willing to grant any sort of interior experiential state to atoms at all. Maybe you're not, but the point still holds that atoms don't have as intense an experience of the rest of the universe as an organism like us. And so there's this movement towards greater complexity and greater consciousness, which is exhibited in this process of cosmic evolution, which I think points to the activity of a creative impulse. And I don't want to call it a creator necessarily, because it's not outside of the creation. It's actively involved in the creative expression of the evolutionary process. All right, next question.
My second question is there anything God could do to make you question his morality? The theologians say that God is morally perfect. He's omnibenevolent. But that's just what they say. That's just what God himself says. Could he be lying? Could God actually be quite wicked? Is there any amount of natural disasters he would allow, any number of people he would send to hell, any amount of suffering or torment or horrible crimes God could inflict on humans or anything else that would make you start to wonder, is this God really of a high moral character? I assume if you're a theist that you think God is of a high moral character and that you're presumably willing to defend anything that he has done in the past. My question is there anything at all that he could potentially do that would cause you to even start to question the goodness of God?
So I think this characterization of the morality of God, it's based on an anthropomorphic understanding of God, and the concept of God itself is difficult to talk about. As Saint Anselm's ontological proof of God sort of shows, God is that beyond which nothing greater can be conceived. God is the infinite, and as a concept, the infinite is difficult to grasp because it is by definition beyond definition, beyond the finite, even though from a panentheistic perspective, the infinite includes the finite. It's not separate from the finite, because finitude is separation. And if you were going to say that the finite is separate from the infinite, then you're somehow limiting the infinite by saying it's not finite. But that's a tangent. The point is, when it comes to good and evil, we're dealing with historically conditioned human ideas and ideals, and what is good today may not necessarily have been good in the past, because there's an evolution of human consciousness, and as consciousness evolves, our understanding of morality and ethics evolves. And I will make reference to this idea of Rudolf Steiner's, that there are two tendencies in cosmic and spiritual evolution. The one which Steiner calls Ahriman is this tendency to level out evolution and to consider it as a purely material process, and where the only goods are to seek your own pleasure and further your own existence as an organism. So it's sort of a hedonistic value. The opposed tendency is luciferic, as opposed to Ahrimanic. And Lucifer is this tendency to want to transcend the material reality in which we are embedded, and it's almost an over-spiritualized lure, whereas Ahriman is an over-materialized lure. And the point of, or the struggle that human beings are faced with, is to try to bring these two together, to strike out a sort of balanced evolutionary path, which doesn't move too far in the direction of pure spirit and transcendence, or fall too far into pure material immanence. And it's not that Lucifer or Ahriman, that one is good and one is evil. It's more complex than that. And I think, to answer your question, basically good and evil are relative terms. Not that there isn't a good, but as we are still in history, historical beings, we can't really announce once and for all what the good is. So for the time being, these terms are relative, and there's nothing that God's not responsible for everything that happens. There's a certain extent to which not only human beings but all creatures have a degree of freedom, and the reason that we could say that God created the universe and is involved in this cosmological evolution is because he or she or it wanted to experience itself in relation to others, to free creatures, and the human being makes decisions which God can't control. And so whatever we call evil is more a result of this desire for God to transcend itself by allowing human beings to have freedom. And so we are the source of evil, not God. Next question.
My third question is somewhat similar to my second question, but it's different in a few important ways. My third question is, if you woke up tomorrow and found that you were God, in other words, if you woke up tomorrow and found that Yahweh or Allah or whoever you believe in was gone, and that instead you were omniscient and omnipotent, would you change anything? Would you just keep the world exactly as it is, with all the people starving to death, with the crimes being committed, with natural disasters, with people going to hell? Or would you, try to make it suck less? If you had all the power so you could snap your fingers and make situations better, would you do it? Or would you keep on track with the agenda of your predecessor, the last administration, Yahweh? Would you keep the world as bad as it is and not intervene or change anything? Would you close down hell, or would you keep the souls burning forever? Because I think I personally would close down hell immediately, and I'd probably close down earth too, and I'd focus on the heaven section of creation. I think that one deserves to have a little more invested in it than the other 2/3. But obviously, the current God, if he exists, which I don't think he does, disagrees, and I want to know if you disagree as well. If you were God, would you change anything?
Okay, so first of all, there are many theological differences within Christianity, but there are plenty of interpretations of the new covenant which Christ represented that says that this new covenant overturns Yahweh's covenant, and so the vengeful, jealous God of the Old Testament is no longer effectively the God of Christianity. Christ is the God of Christianity. And for Christ, one could argue that hell is sort of done away with, and everyone is saved. Everyone goes to heaven. And certainly there are Christians that deny that and still have this Old Testament interpretation of the fact that the idea that sinners will go to hell. But if I were to wake up and realize I was God, would I change anything? Well, I think from a panentheist perspective, that's the main realization, that God is in all. So you are God, and I am God. And part of our modern predicament, after Nietzsche declared that God is dead, that doesn't mean that God doesn't continue to operate in some way in our world. It means that we, as self-conscious moral agents, must take on that responsibility ourselves and see to it that the work of the divine in healing the suffering of the world is carried out. That's now our responsibility, not some transcendent being which is going to reach in and supernaturally fix everything. You and I and other human beings have to struggle to make Earth more like heaven. We don't have any outside help in that respect. All the help we need, all the divinity we need, is within us.
My fourth question is, what evidence do you have in support of your own specific religion that you think that all the other religions fail to provide? Pretty much all religions have miracles that they claim that they're prophets and gods have performed. Pretty much all religions have prophecies that they claim to have been fulfilled. Most religions have holy books. What is it about your specific religion that you think the other religions lack? In other words, if you are a Christian, why is it you worship Yahweh and not Allah? What is it about the Christian faith that you find convincing in a way that the other religions fail to be? And the same goes if you are a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever you are answering this video.
Well, when I look at human history and all the religious traditions and wisdom traditions that we have developed as a species, I don't see any true contradictions on a deep level. Certainly there are surface disagreements, and there's a tendency for many religious believers to become exclusive and reject all other religions aside from their own as false or wrong. But I think something along the lines of what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy is at work. That is at work in human history, and it allows us to see the underlying unity of all traditions. I do think that there is a certain evolutionary trajectory to human consciousness, though, which is leading us to a greater sense of freedom and a greater sense of love. And so, in that sense, religions that value these freedom of the individual, not just to do whatever the individual wants in a sort of arbitrary sense, seeking their own desires or seeking the satisfaction of their own desires, but rather a freedom to do what is good and what is true and what is beautiful, and a freedom to love. Any religion which brings us to value these, I think, is highest. And I think indeed most of the great wisdom traditions, the great religions of our species, do value these things. And the other sorts of strange beliefs that they hold are more peripheral appendages, which I think can be left behind and excised from the core of the tradition. Okay, last question.
My fifth and final question is, if your religion is in fact not true, if the scriptures and doctrines that you believe for however long you have believed are false, would you want to know? Do you want to know if God doesn't exist? Or even if he doesn't exist, would you prefer to keep on believing that he does? That's my last question.
Well, again, for me, religion and spirituality and God, it's not a question of belief. It's a question of using this powerful symbol to interpret the meaning of experience that I have, that I share with others. And so I don't think that there are any specific beliefs that I hold that aren't open to experiential and, in that sense, experimental evidence to the contrary. My spiritual attitude, my spiritual view is based more on experience than on any sort of scripture, though I think that there is plenty of inspiration and power to be drawn from Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu scripture, and other scriptures. But I don't think it's a matter of believing in the letter of the scriptures. It's more seeing through the letter and re-enlivening the spirit with which these scriptures were originally recorded. So yeah, 20 minutes, that's a long video, but hopefully some of what I said strikes you as interesting, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about it, or not. But yeah, thanks for listening.